Next, let's talk about the impact of this whole situation on Michigan schools with an expert. Joining me on the line is Charyn Hain. She's a partner in the litigation and trial services practices team at Varnum Law. Welcome to Daily Detroit.
Thank you.
So, I wanted to talk to you around all of the challenges that our schools are facing statewide. As many people know, the governor has ordered the statewide closure of buildings for a time, but that doesn't mean that the work stops, does it, Charyn?
No, it does not. It just means that the work takes on an entire different level of difficulty, as well as takes on new challenges in how to both physically and financially handle the load that school districts are facing.
Well, one of the things I think about right off the bat, and I mean, we'll hit a few different topics here, but our podcast is based in the city of Detroit. There are a lot of people with needs here. And one of the on-the-ground logistical things I think about is things like, school lunches and things like that. There's a lot of students that are dependent on that for part of their food. And I've noticed that there's some programs around that, but do you have any more kind of clarity on what's going on a grander scale?
Yes, you should. If you have access to the internet, you probably can find out what your specific district is doing. The primary things that I've seen my district clients and others do is they are providing meals. Some of them are providing them daily with specific drop-off and pickup times. So, for example, you can come to this location, we're going to do a drive-through, or we may have somebody standing outside handing you food, and come between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. and get your food. Some are doing it every other day, but providing 2 days worth of food. There's some lifting, actually, of the restrictions, so to speak, on this, meaning that the children who qualify for free breakfast and lunch have to qualify for federally funded money. The federal funding has actually granted a waiver, so now it's less restrictive, meaning that virtually any child age 18 and under can get these food sources without having to necessarily prove that they're one of these students who would otherwise get it if they were in the school cafeteria. And I think everyone has been handling this quite beautifully as far as I can tell from the districts I work with. It's what's in the interest of the children. These children need food. If your district doesn't have a plan, I would be really surprised, but these children should be getting food, and the districts all should have plans in place to make that happen. You just need to make sure you know what your specific district is doing so you can avail yourself of those services.
With all of this disruption going on and closures, there's a lot of worries that people have around, frankly, their paychecks, right? Because it's, there's less revenue coming in for businesses, all that kind of stuff. But it seems like there's already a plan in place for teachers and school employees, as I understand, correct?
Well, the governor at least left it to districts. Her mandate to close school buildings didn't require that teachers get paid. The districts that I've spoken to, most of them plan to pay them. There's also vendor contract service issues. So, for example, some school districts use vendors for their food service or their transportation, and that will be on a contract basis most likely. Everyone is looking to make sure people are financially stable to the extent possible. But again, is going to be on a district by district basis. And that's something that if you are a school employee, hopefully your administration has already communicated this to you. But if they haven't, that's something that you could and should inquire about what their plan is going forward. And of course, the uncertainty here is we're currently closed through April 5. What happens as we approach that day? Is this going to be extended? And then how does that tax the financial resources of the district? So I think it's a very real concern to everyone, including the administration and the people who are pushing out the payroll on a weekly or biweekly basis.
Organizationally and legally, how much do these problems multiply if this gets extended for a long time? What if this gets doubled? What if this gets tripled? Does this get more complicated? Does this get more worrisome? What is kind of your sense?
My initial reaction to that is, in addition to saying yes, it definitely gets more complicated, is my biggest concern would be what are we doing to get these kids educated? Because we really have, for the K-12s, we have probably 2.5, maybe even 3 months of school left. And the Michigan legislature, I believe, currently considering proposed legislation to alter the instructional days required by law. But even if they do that, what does that mean for our kids? are they going to be able to progress to the next grade level? I don't mean to panic anyone by saying that, because I'm hoping that doesn't happen, but these are things that if we're extended out 6 weeks or 9 weeks, what happens? And those are, I think, one of the reasons why they have ordered school closures, is to hopefully slow this and get to a point where we can let the kids back into school so that we don't have to deal with those specific issues and can continue out the school year. Some districts are considering doing online learning. Some are doing online learning just to essentially repeat what the kids, experienced last year, almost like refreshers. Some are looking at options of actually moving the curriculum forward. But K-12s, I would think, generally speaking, probably aren't set up very well to accomplish that. And I think a lot of them, even if they're looking at that could even be 2 or 3 weeks out before they get that set up.
I'm getting the sense here from this conversation that it's there are things that the governor puts down from a centralized point of view, but each of these districts seems to have a lot of autonomy on their own. Can you talk about that a little bit and kind of what that means for folks? Because you not only have public districts, but you also have charters and a whole mix of things going on. It seems to be a kind of, although there's something coming from the top, decentralization in how this is going to get implemented.
Yeah, and I mean, first of all, I'd like to say it needs to be decentralized, because we're going to have a very broad discrepancy between both the financial as well as, the personnel opportunities, depending on what district or even what private school you're in, right? So you may have a small district that has much more limited resources. You might have a bigger district which maybe still has more limited resources, and how they can react to that is going to vary. So, as you know, the governor's directive is that all buildings are closed to students for educational purposes. What that's going to look like on a district-by-district basis will vary. And I think the key here is that every educator or administrator I've worked with or talked to is really looking to see what's going to be in the best interest of the kids. Can we get them some kind of structured programming, either through some type of online learning, or maybe even some type of programming that we would push out to them to do some reading programs, that type of thing. The other issue, of course, is it's going to vary by your high school programs are going to look a lot different than your K-6 programs. So it really is a challenge for educators, and I'm sure for parents too, who are sitting home with children who are probably wanting to play games on the video system if they have one, or who just don't have opportunities because they need to go to work and they need childcare. So it's really quite a struggle across the board for everyone, and the districts need to address these on an individualized basis, because they're going to have individualized constructs and individualized abilities to address these certain issues.
Have you seemed to have gotten the sense that people are ready for this or have been planning for this? Or do you feel like this is something that was just, I don't know if the right term is act of God, but, something that just kind of came in and they just were not prepared for? Is this greater than they comprehended in the past?
Yeah, that's a great question, because when I first heard that they were closing schools, I thought of, the polar vortex from last year, right, where a lot of schools were closed for quite some period of time. And not only that, they had a lot of snow days even outside of that. That's something that here in Michigan we're kind of used to. And, of course, those typically, other than last year, may last a day or two, and then the kids are back. To say someone is unprepared sounds negative, and I don't mean it to be that way, but I'm not sure anyone was fully prepared for, had fully thought out the fact that schools might be completely closed down for this lengthy period of time. At least it hadn't been something that was on the radar, 4, 5, 6 weeks ago, when programming could have really been put into place, or those wheels could have started turning. So I do think that this is just an unprecedented situation that, again, I've seen, generally speaking, school administration deal with just making a valiant effort to do whatever they can to ensure that the kids are protected and educated and fed. But I don't think that anyone was fully prepared for this, or maybe they couldn't even be fully prepared for this.
Well, kind of along those lines, and before I let you go, I kind of wanted to ask you, what are some of the kinds of programs or logistics that maybe might surprise people, or they might not think about, that school districts are having to handle, that, it's not maybe in their radar, but it's a real challenge for folks?
Well, the one that jumps right to mind is probably special education students in instruction. So if you have a student who's either has it's called an IEP, an individualized education plan, or a Section 504 plan, those students are required by federal law to have access to education even if they're not physically present in school. Now, I'm not going to bore you with all the details of the law, and that's a little bit of a generalization, but they're entitled to what's called FAPE, free appropriate public education. So the questions that are raised there are, if everyone's out, I think the law is very clear that if no one is in school, then school districts do not have to provide FAPE to special education students. But what happens when you institute online learning for your regular ed students? Do you need to then somehow provide instruction, whether it's online or through other means, to your special ed students? And you probably do. Another really related to special education is that these individualized plans, they have to be discussed, and a lot of them expire about this time of year. Do they need to have what are called IEP meetings with the parents and the educators at issue, even if school's closed? And I think a lot of people are probably pretty flexible on that. Some people aren't, but school districts face loss of federal funding if they don't comply, and other sanctions if they don't comply with these laws. And as of right this very minute, I don't think the U.S. Department of Education has really weighed in on IEP meetings. I would expect that they would, because districts are going to need guidance. And these are things that I think people don't necessarily take into consideration. It's an additional layer of complication.
Well, Charyn, thank you so much for your time and for giving us some illumination on some things that I think maybe people didn't think about here on Daily Detroit.
Oh, my pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity.